asked Poe if he wanted me to lob him a question to start with, and he said no, whatever the interest is among you. So who's got a question? I mean, I gather most of you, if not all of you, have read samples of his work. It's distributed. You all have an idea of what he does and how he writes, some of his experiences. So what do you say? Who has a question to start with? If not, I'll call on someone to maybe.
She's got to ask it. See, that's if you come in late, you have to ask a question. we just made up that rule.
Kristen, do you have a question for our visiting author?
Come on, it's like 4 minutes early.
What? Yeah. Why hassle me? That's
Sarah's not for you.
Isn't that for?
No.
We can sit here silently. All right.
Here we go.
All right.
Go.
Yeah, I've been dying to ask this. So we were reading parts of your memoir in class, and one of the things that really jumped out at me, something I wish I could do that I can't, that you managed to do very, very, very well. Each sentence seems just very carefully crafted and thought about, not just in terms of the rhythm, but the words you use. And I was thinking, this is so magnificently individualized. Do you put a lot of work into revision and really look at each sentence to think about how to structure it, or is this just the way you write naturally?
No. Okay. No, it's mostly labor intensive. There's some sentences in there that took me 5 years to get right, the way I like them. The one about the flibbertage of it, I can't remember that sentence, but rumor. I wish I could remember the thing that I looked at for 6 years. It took me 6 years to write this book, and a lot of that was just rewriting certain. I mean, I had the structure of the book, and I had all the stuff that I wanted to put in it, and so a lot of that time was just getting the sentences right. And then, of course, making them integrate with the paragraphs, which had to integrate with the, how that goes. So yeah, it's all work. I have a natural ear, and and I'm always keen to assonance and alliteration and rhythm and separating, putting in a nice long sentence and then saying, the sky was blue, and then Faulknering on from there, if you'll excuse the verb. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I was just really curious because it seems like in early drafts of work I have a lot of filler, and it just takes a lot of time to really cut material down, get rid of the passive voice, think about new and exciting words to use instead of the words that first come to me. And
right.
I was reading the memoir and I was just thinking, this is what I wish I could do.
Yeah.
How much longer is it going to take me to get there?
Oh, you'll get it. You just have to be willing to work at it. Really,
Yeah.
Honestly, I think anybody can do it. Anyone can cook.
So you buy into the 10,000 hour theory?
Yeah.
Levels thing or whatever?
Sure, I think so. I think so, and I think it can work against you too. I think you can over-refine. I think you can kill your prose to some extent. You have to trust some of your original compositional instincts. But for the most part, yeah, it's just over and over and over again revision. The problem that you have to remember about revision is that if you've got something that's not going on, if there's no plot or interesting characters or idea, and you keep rewriting it, which is what I did for much of my earlier career, thinking that revision would be my salvation. It isn't. You've got to have material. You've got to have some kind of electricity, some kind of energy in the thing that will pull it along of its own accord. And so revision is not an answer, but it is in many ways a solution. Okay, is that it? Oh, sorry.
I guess we started.
Yes.
So if it doesn't have that spark, like a first draft,
Yeah.
and I don't know how you realize that. I mean, I guess I have ways of trying to realize it in my own work, but do you just drop it immediately, or does it take like a couple of times hammering at it before you realize?
Well, before you even undertake the thing, it would have to have what I would call my own interest. I would have to be. My own interest would have to be invested in this thing long term. So it would be an important. I didn't want to write this book, but then my neighbor went and disappeared, and then he was found up in the hills, burned and found, and nobody knew what happened. And I was invested right from that moment, and or even really before that, because of the nature. But I didn't realize that, the circumstances would be so bizarre, and so that was enough to pull me through. But there was there was a lot of stuff I had to overcome. And one of the things I do is go ahead, April.
Well, one of the questions I had, particularly when you're writing about material that you're very close to, I mean, obviously you were close enough to your neighbor that his brutal disappearance lit some fire under your head.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm curious about is when you write, do you feel like your voice in your early career has changed as you progress, or do you feel like you always have had control, or almost just like a confidence in your writing that drove the writing?
I never had that, no. I've always had a voice, though. I've always had a personality. I think voice is more easily just thought of as personality. And, like everything, as you develop, I would hope it would improve, as long as you're sort of true to your own, your own cause or whatever. So my early work was, I shudder to look at it. My mother found an old story of mine that I'd written probably 30 years ago. She thought it was good, and she sent it to me, and it was horrible. And I was intoxicated with the Southern Gothics at that time, and it was a Southern Gothic piece, and it really wasn't bad at all, but it was just purely imitation, and there was no idea in it, or there was nothing memorable. It didn't. I tore the thing up and was grateful that nobody else would have to see it. So it took me a long time, all that stuff. And that's a question that I get a lot about voice, because that's obviously one of the key, 3 or 4 things that's going to separate you from the 10 million other people who are trying to get attention. Let's see, there's a chair here. I can stand, too, and you can sit here. I don't really like sitting anyway. It's loud, though. Take it out. I was maundering about something. Thank goodness they came in and interrupted me. Let's go to the next question. Oh, voice. I just wanted to talk briefly about voice. It's something I think that you look for. Something that's just fine. Everybody's got it. And, if you work at it, you'll uncover it. It may not be as distinctive as someone else's voice. That's the only, it's the only reality you'll have to face. But, if you've got something to say and you found a way in which to say it, you'll say it in your own way, and that'll be your voice, and that's about what it'll amount to. Anyway, somebody else popped their hand. Yeah, Ryan.
One of the things that I like about your essays is the sort of tonal complexity. Because in a lot of points you're very conversational, you're funny. But at the end of a lot of your essays, there's a sort of sudden seriousness or heaviness that I feel, which I really like. And I'm wondering if that's just something that you sort of consciously revise for tone, or if that's sort of part of your voice.
Yeah, I'm looking for all the time. I'm looking for mood. That's what in music and film, all of it. There's that mood. There's that feeling, and very difficult. Very difficult to achieve from a conscious point of view. But, when I'm writing about something, I want to care about it, and I'll have a certain feeling about it. And if it's an important enough subject, then the way that I feel about it, I generally try to translate onto the page. And I think I can do that. It's very difficult to do, though. When I first started writing, I wanted to make people laugh, and I wanted to make them cry and crap like that. And so I would try to manipulate my reader. And it never worked. It rarely worked, or if it did, it was pretty minimal. So it took me. I'm not even approaching the material that made me that made you come and see me until my late 30s. I'm not even considering writing. For whatever odd reason, I didn't think that my personal experiences would have any value to readers. I thought that I was not interesting, and that my life, since it was so full of failure and bad choices, wasn't good material. And so I was trying to write about other people far away, their stories, and I guess I had some success with that. But as soon as I started to write about myself and my own experiences and my own worldview and whatnot, then I saw that I had made a connection. People started writing to me and saying that this story meant something to them, or I've had people actually tell me that I saved their life and stuff like that. Because you don't feel like you're so alone when somebody's describing how they're striking out in the world. How things are not going the way they're supposed to be going. So I don't know. And from that, I guess that's if there's any. I don't want to use the word formula, but maybe conscious approach. That's probably it for mood. But definitely mood is the secret to any great work. It's what separates a great movie from a good movie. It's what separates a great song from a good song. It's what separates a great story or essay from a good one. Because a good one will have all the elements, but mood is something that's just almost, you only can really understand it by experiencing it. So, anyway. Is that enough about that movie?
No, I have another question.
Yeah.
Does music influence you?
I like to consider myself to be a musical writer, but I don't know. My parents forced me into playing the violin for 8 years, and I hated it. But I think it did develop my ear. And I don't think there's a lot of musical writers, but there are some that I admire. Carson McCullers being the primary example. She was a classically trained pianist, and there's a story about her going to school in New York or something and losing all her money on the subway, and then deciding to write Heart is a Lonely Hunter, at age 22 or whatever. But whatever the story, she has that musical background, and you can feel that musicality. Her mood is musical. Her prose is musical. She's so much better than... I'm a big admirer of Truman and Capote. There's a big argument between them about who's came first, because their styles are similar. But stylistically, I think she's superior. And she's got that, she's got that thing in there that I think comes from many places. But it comes from music, certainly. Yeah. Any other questions?
Come on.
Yeah, ask me a stupid question if you want. Yeah, you don't have to ask me a stupid question.
Do you write fiction too, besides?
Yeah, I started out as a fiction writer.
I was wondering, as far as deciding how to approach a topic, how do you determine whether create nonfiction or fictional?
Well, I don't know how it happens with other writers, but for me, I was writing fiction, exclusively fiction, and I wasn't interested in nonfiction. And I was selling stories to the Sun magazine, and then I sold them a story called The Empty House of My Broken-Hearted Father, which they paid me more money for, and then I sold them another story, and they gave me less money for it. And I said, hold the phone here, what's going on? And they said, oh, we thought that last story was an essay. And I said, oh, you pay more money for essays then, do you? And so that's how I made the transition. And I found that's how I found that my fictional, all my training in fiction, understanding of pace and dialogue and all this other stuff, character development and mood, could be much more powerful in a true story. And I had so much experience traveling and floundering around and having all these different jobs and I'm a very social person, so wherever I go, even if it's the bus depot or standing out in front of a residential hotel, I just talk with people, and I engage people, and I get to know them, and I can paint them. I've learned over the years how to catch certain features and nuances of speech and little historical, biographical bits about them, so that I can turn a character pretty quickly for my purposes. And I found that it lent itself ideally to nonfiction, and I prefer nonfiction now because the nonfiction story, which is what I write, my essays are not informational. They're stories. They proceed in much the same way that a conventional fictional story would go. But when people know, I was telling this woman on the plane about how the TSA agent who had to grab my leg and mix up my luggage and all this stuff, he's told me, I read your book, I really liked your book. So I said, he knows who I am, he lives in my town, he knows all the people in my book, but he's still got to grab my leg. And anyway, she thought that was funny, but she asked me about we got into a conversation about my book, and of course the first question she asked me is where I got my inspiration. And now I'm divagating. I've completely lost my... Come on in! Lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
Just creative nonfiction and fiction and what you like.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, it's just that I started to tell her what the book was about. I said it was about this math professor. She said, oh, it's fiction. And she kind of lost interest. I said, no, it really happened. And now, wham, And then, that's all we talked about for the next half hour. True stories are more powerful than made-up stories. Even though made-up stories can be, they can do just as much and maybe even more work than a true story. Because, of course, you can manipulate events and whatever you want to talk about, you can build all the way up to that thing that you want to talk about, and you can use any means to get there. With a true story, you're pretty much confined to the events as they happened and the things as they were said. That's what I was trying to get to. Any other questions? How's that chair?
Awesome. I feel like I'm your assistant.
We have one back here.
Oh, yeah.
It's you, Elise.
Oh, okay. Do you still write fiction ever, or did you just switch?
Oh, yeah. I still do. I struggle with it a little bit.
So then how do you decide whether if there's something that happens to you, if you see something, how do you decide whether you want to write fiction?
Well, it's easy. That's really easy for me. Actually, the first, 6 or 7 stories that I wrote, fictional stories, that were successful were transcriptions of reality with some, minor sequence changes and a few technical things here and there, and some convoluted high-toned prose and stuff like that. So, The Blue Devils of Blue River Avenue is the story about this little girl who lived across the street from me who was abused by her father. And I wrote that thing just as almost exactly as it was, but then I used these fictive techniques. And so I think it's a powerful story, and it was a successful story, but it was almost a transcription of the way things were. Now the rule for me is, if I've got a complete story, something that really happened, then I'll just tell it that way, because it just works better and it's easier for me. I don't have to make somebody up, right? I don't have to make up dialogue and hope that I'm getting it right, hope that it somehow applies to the story that I'm telling. It's not regurgitation, but it's transcription, and to some extent it's transcription. So if I've got, and I worked at an Italian restaurant downtown when I was very young, delivering pizzas, and there was just all kinds of crazy stuff that happened down there, and insane people, and all the drivers were getting robbed, so I bought a .357 Magnum from a vice cop. Had no idea how to use it. So I'm carrying around this .357 Magnum. I could easily kill. I almost killed several people with it. but I kept the bullet one off. I thought. I really wasn't even sure. I had the bullet so that I could. If somebody tried to rob me or assault me, then I would click once, and then the bullet would fall into the chamber, and then I would shoot him. And then I had 5 bullets. I had an Air Force jacket that I carried, and I had 5 bullets here in case I got in a shootout. So, talk about stupid. But anyway. That's great material, but there's no real story there, right? So for the last 10 years, I've been writing this story called 7-Eleven Suicide about a kid. Basically, it's about how guns change people, but it's also a romance. There was this woman, this waitress that I was in love with, who nothing ever happened. She ran away with the pizza cook before I ever had a chance, and I would have never had a chance anyway. But I like the material. I like the energy of the material. I like the set, all the characters in the place. Everything is there. The nostalgia for the 1970s. And so there's no essay there. I did write an essay on that subject matter called Green-Eyed Dog, but it's pretty minor league. You know, it's just a little nostalgic piece that I don't think much of, which I have stripped and put into this story. Some of those, the sentences that I liked and some of the scenery has gone into this. But so the short answer, the long answer to your short question is that the rule now for me generally is that if I have material that I'm interested in, but it isn't a complete story in itself, it becomes a story that is finished by invention and manufacture. And then if the story is complete, then I'll just write a personal essay, as they call them. Does that make sense to you? You're just saying that.
Someone else. Clint?
Yeah, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Could you just take me through a writing day for you?
Yeah, well, I get up nowadays. You know, it used to be that I lived alone, and I would get up and put on my stocking cap and go straight to the whatever means I was using. I started with a typewriter, but now I've got a computer. But I like to write in the morning, so I'll take my son to school, and then I'll make some coffee, and then I'll just go. I don't eat because eating kind of pulls all the blood out of your brain, and then I'll just open something up. I keep at least 10 projects going, and if one isn't working, I'll move to another. Usually I'm hot on one thing before it starts to disintegrate, and then I have to go to something else. And then I try to work 4 hours a day. Sometimes lately I've been working longer than that, but sometimes I only get 3 hours. I like to work every single day just because I like it, not because I'm that dedicated. It's just the one place for me that I really enjoy being in. And then, along around 10 o'clock, I'll make myself a black bean burrito with bacon or something like that. Then I'll go check the mail. This is a fascinating answer, wasn't it? Yeah. Long ago, I used to have to, up until about 2 years ago, I've had to have a job, janitorial, cooking, warehouse, factory, something like that. So sometimes I'd have to go to work, in the morning, and I would come home and work in the afternoons or at night, whenever. Force myself to get 2 or 3 hours in, but wouldn't be at the top of my game. And I used to be, even in my very early years, I was so dedicated. I was like Balzac, I would put a blanket over. I would put a pair, because I always had loud neighbors, so I had a pair of headphones that rifler, sharpshooters use. I would put a pair of those on. I would put earplugs in, then I put a blanket over my head, and I was writing longhand then, and I would work, 5-hour shifts and take a break, and then 5 more hours, total dedication. That's the period in which I wrote that Southern Gothic piece that isn't worth a damn. So, yeah.
Well, I'm not a real writer, but my husband is. I just want to make sure because you are a real writer. I'm seeing for the first time. Yeah, trust me, this is my first event, and thank you to my professor. He says something clicks in that inspires him to write. Sure. Is that true? Like, do you get clicked? Like, inspiring?
It's not a click for me as much as it is just a memory, an event, or emotion that's strong enough to keep me going. Really, I don't get a lot of inspiration. I suppose there's a poetic side of me. There's an Irish side of me that there is this font that I have that I can tap into, and it'll, it even interests me sometimes because it doesn't seem like me. But that's a pretty much of a syntactic exercise right there. I'm not getting ideas from that. Whatever this thing is that's got me interested in, that's this little girl sitting in the fog on my front lawn when I'm 12 years old and she's got a big splotch of blood on her gown. That's what drives me.
That's what is clicking.
That's what's driving me through that story. And the language itself, which may be Gaelic or something, in some previous form, Aboriginal form, is which was clustering somehow on that. And I'm not I try not to be conscious of that process. The more I talk about this, probably the worse I am. Because one of the tricks for me, it's not a trick, but obviously everybody in this room knows what it's like to be shut down by your own mind, or Yahoo Sports, or girls in bikinis or whatever, is that you're riding along, and pretty soon you're crushed by your own outer mind, your meta mind. And the way to beat that thing, well, there's a bunch of ways to beat it, but I beat it by writing faster than it. I outstrip it, So I just write really fast because I know the idea, and then I just let that thing go. And sometimes it crystallizes. I get some kind of crystallization. Sometimes I don't. I don't get shut down as much as I used to by consciousness or those ulterior demons that work against all of us. Yes, somebody else. Yes.
I teach her, so I have a job. A lot of these people are living with the anxiety of, going out there and trying to get a teaching job. Many are aspiring to do that. I just wondered if you felt like there are some advantages to maybe not working in academia and being a writer.
Oh, well,
it's hard for academia to accommodate everyone.
Yeah. Well, there's two distinct disadvantages to academia. One is that while you're sitting in this room, you could be in a really crummy residential motel in a bed full of roaches with an old man dying next door. And that's going to give you, that's really going to give you a lot of juju or what. It's not, what's the word they use? Mojo. Mojo's the bad voodoo. They always say, my mojo rising, mojo's the bad voodoo. You want the juju. That's the good voodoo. So you need to get some good voodoo. And it's hard to do that in a classroom, in a structured setting, climate-controlled setting, where a lot of your focus is in, achieving power, getting position, filling out lots of paperwork. When you could very easily just be, living under a bridge somewhere and observing nature from there. Not to say that your life has to be difficult, but to write, because it doesn't. Those would be the two disadvantages. One is that you could be getting material on the ground, on the fly, especially if you want to write about America and to know America, and that would include, the full spectrum of America, not just the scholastic aspects. And the other one is that jockeying for power, that you're always trying to keep your position. I guess maybe not always, but I've got a lot of friends. The majority of my writer friends teach, and I find that it seems to constrain them in that respect. It doesn't really, because I don't know. But that's just my personal. That's just my personal opinion, because everybody's different. Robert Penn Warren, he wrote my favorite novel of the 20th century, All the King's Men, and he had a PhD, not a PhD in writing. I think he had a history PhD from the University in Tennessee, what is it, Vanderbilt or something like that. But so you can do it. You can go at it a number of different ways. I don't want to lecture anybody. I used to lecture people about how they should live their lives. I don't know anything. I really don't. But I know how I did it and how I thought it should be done. Like I say, I say this almost everywhere I go, but I was out to write the great American novel when I first hit the ground. I was out, and I figured if I wanted to write that, I had to know. And not just my own little neighborhood, but the bars and the railroads and the stockyards and all that. So I went out and did that. The barges and the standing on your head in Philadelphia with a flock of seagulls taking a crap over you. Anyway, next.
Wayne, you had another question, yeah?
Sorry.
Yes, I was going to ask if you ever find yourself having difficulty moving between writing fiction and nonfiction. Do you find you can work on them at the same time? You work on a fiction piece on Monday?
The problem is that sometimes I don't know whether it'll work better as fiction or nonfiction. I wrote a piece called Man Standing Under a Rocket, Taking Off for the Moon, which is about my escapades with smoking crack cocaine. It was a powerful story, but I thought, well, God, why should I make this up? Why can't I write it the way it was? Because it was that was one of the early stories. So I rewrote it as an essay. I just translated it into the real story, and it was called Failure of a Man Named Love, which took place in Love Canal. I don't know if you were there for that. You probably missed that, huh? Niagara Falls?
Yeah, I missed that. That was before.
Yeah. Anyway, that was one of the great environmental disasters, obviously since forgotten, of the 20th century. But so yeah, I'm always going back and forth. I know that this piece that I'm working on now is going to be fiction because I don't have a proper introduction or an ending. If I wrote about this thing in a straightforward way, it would be a series of anecdotes because there's nothing to tie it together. It's just about delivering pizzas. And I've thought about 1,000 ways of writing an essay. In other words, just have an address where you go and there's an orgy, or you go meet Gregory Peck's babysitter, or and then each one, or you go down to Logan Heights and you get robbed, and then each one of those, and I maybe could string those together, but I don't see how because I've never been able to write that kind of tricky, segmented, whatever they call that style, where they take, you take these little vignettes and you stack them on top of each other, and somehow they make a complete story. I've never been a real big fan of that approach either. I think you should tell the story from the beginning to the end. There I go telling you what you should do. Yeah, but the New Yorker likes that kind of stuff. The Sun loves that kind of stuff. And I've submitted some little vignette pieces, and they just shoved it right back in my face because they know I can do better. They know I can tell a whole story, and you want to get that. Ryan, you want to get that feeling at the end. You want to be able to run through this story, and you're sneaking up on your reader. You start by writing one thing, which leads them to believe that it's not going to be about what you're actually writing about. And then, right at the end, you try to go wham, and it kind of leads back to something that you set up in the 4th or the 5th paragraph, which is not by design. It's by looking at the thing over and over again and seeing, where the strong points are. Yeah, anybody else?
Yeah. I really enjoyed this book. I wondered if you got a lot of response from people about the things that you said about autism, or if you've gotten some response about that.
No, all everybody wants to know about is the murder. Yeah, I'd like to think, I had to put those things in there, otherwise it just would have been, as I explained in the book, it just would have been, pretty basically true crime, which I wasn't interested in. But that's what most of the readers are interested in. And so when I go make presentations, I rarely get questions about my bilingual marriage, my bicultural marriage, or my son's struggles. So, anybody else?
Was it ever hard to prioritize writing the great American novel as opposed to destroying America when you're constantly getting crapped on or living in a roach-filled apartment?
Well, it's easy. I think it's easy to take the dystopic approach and to criticize America, and I do plenty of that. But I'm a formist in that it's just harder to take something that's disorganized or that's collapsing and to try to pull it together in some way and make it seem like there's hope, like there's a chance. We're just all people and we're flawed, and America's still a great country, even though, it's got all these problems. So I'm always trying to, go a little. You have to realize that as a writer, you're competing with 100 million people, and I don't look at it this way. But you have to look at it this way in almost every. If success is the goal, you have to go against the grain. You have to go against the herd, because if you're going with everybody else, they're not going to be successful. And whether that's betting football or the stock market. Or writing an essay, you have to be a little bit contrary, and you have to be contrary in a subtle way. I don't say you have to be establishment the whole way through, but there's got to be some aspect of that works in there. Especially, Bukowski does this really well. He just goes on and on about how terrible things are, and then he makes you laugh, and that's why people like him. I don't know where he'll stand finally when the poets are all ranked, or if it'll even matter when the poets are all ranked. But it's something that's very unusual to be able to do that, to talk about how screwed up everything is, but then to make somebody laugh, and to make somebody laugh in a wholesome way, not a cheap way. Because you're being brought into the fold all of a sudden. You're looking at this world that's a mess, and it's somebody else's fault, and then all of a sudden you realize, hey, this is my world. This is my mess of a world, and I'm a mess too. And I don't know, something about that makes a little song. I think that's how it works. I don't know if that's useful to you or not, but anyway.
Clint?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
Well, I was wondering, if you could give me some tips about how to be inventive, because, I really struggle with being inventive.
Uh-huh.
I always like ironical stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so, I don't know, even, telling a joke, it's, hard for me to, think of one.
Right. Well, you don't have to tell a joke. Really, honestly, you got to find out what you do best. I know I just heard an interview with Billy Collins. I think it was on NPR or something like that. Or, he's a very funny poet, but he wanted to be a serious poet, but he couldn't do it. He was a funny guy, so he started writing funny poetry, and then he became a laureate. So I think you got to go with what you're given. You can't just decide that I want to be this. I can't be the center for the Los Angeles Lakers, no matter how hard I try. But I can do other things. And so take what you got and work with it. And I don't know about inventive. I don't think I'm particularly inventive. I have sometimes I can come up with a clever metaphor. And I've learned, I was lousy at dialogue. I was lousy at just everything when I first started out. Sometime when you get the chance, if you want to be heartwarmed, read John Steinbeck's letters. He's not a very good writer. He really is technically no good at all, but he just works and works and works. Now he's basically a journalistic writer, but he's learned how to borrow from other people, and to turn a phrase. All these things will come to you if you really want them, if you're willing to pay the price for them, because the sacrifice is, as a rule, is a lot bigger than most people think when they first get into it. Because it's language. Language is something we can all do. It's something I'm doing right now. We can have a conversation, but for whatever reason, the written word is almost like the holy grail for humanity. And maybe it's because it's the hallmark. It's really what separates us from all the other organisms, and maybe that's a presumptuous statement. But I'm just astounded at how people who are good with words can achieve fill the, and this includes throughout history there were the literary people were the holy people, and it's still pretty much that way. And I don't exactly know why, but I suspect it's because language is much more important than we give credit for. And I'm talking about being accomplished in language, not just being, a good lawyer. But lawyers have a lot of power too, just because they can manipulate the language. Did that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah. One more. So, given what you're talking about earlier, have you felt any resistance from the writing establishment? Thing, but academic people, you've kind of been very successful coming through the back door, as it were.
Yeah.
Or have you just felt embraced? I mean, there's definitely a tradition of that too. People who work from the ground up.
There's a college where I live, and I'm friends with quite a few of the professors up there, and I've read in their classes. I feel a little. I don't know, man. Everybody's. I'm surprised when I came here to find out that some of my essays were being taught. When I went to Iowa City, they were teaching my essays there. Nobody told me. Nobody asked me. But so I think, I could be petty and say that there's some kind of distinction between the way I went and the way that a writer would come out of an academic background. But in the end, all that matters is if you've done something good. And so I'll just take the high road there. I know that Kathy Barr, who teaches literature, is angry at my book because it's not a journalistic exercise. She knows that I made some stuff up, that I moved some things around, as I said, that I changed some sequences, that I was in some places where I wasn't. I did that so that I could tell the story in the most fluid, digestible, readable, comprehensible manner. I didn't do that to aggrandize myself or to change the way that this thing was seen. And what I tell everybody is that if you take the factual record of Stephen Hadia's disappearance and death, the newspaper accounts, the autopsy reports, the police reports, and then you set them next to my book, the book is going to explain everything. And I've drawn out all of these, even if they're opinions or theories, I've drawn them out and I've articulated them. But there's none of that in the factual record. The factual record is a fog. It's not only a fog, it's entirely misleading. He was misdescribed, misrepresented, and totally misunderstood. And so that's... But Kathy doesn't forgive me, and she's a little cold with me now. But that's a personal thing, I think. And then, of course, there's jealousy and rivalry and all those things, too, that I can't account for and that I'm not really interested in. Because, look, write a good book, write a good story, and then, let the chips fall where they may. Everybody's going to come at it from a different angle, and they're going to do it in their own way. And that's what you really need to know, honestly. You have to listen to people, especially listen to people you trust, but eventually you're going to go your own way. And if you don't go your own way, then you're probably not going to go very far, that's all. And that doesn't mean you have to quit school either. I know that's what you were hearing. Maybe that's but I'm not saying that. No, I don't want to put you in harm's way. Because I should have got killed out there. I should have got killed out there a dozen times, and I got lucky, or maybe somebody was looking after me. Anyway, any other questions?
I have a question, but I'm hoping you didn't answer it completely with Gwen earlier before I walked in. But I was really struck by the economy of language in your writing, and I was wondering, like, what does it look like when you're whittling down a sentence? Like, do you read your work out loud? Mm-hmm. Do you ever use a thesaurus?
Oh, yeah, I use a thesaurus. I don't believe in thesauruses. I'm totally opposed to them, but I use them anyway. Yeah, especially if I've got to, I've seen this with other writers, too. They'll use a particular word, and then they'll use the same word down the way. It's because that word sounded good in their head, and so they just put it down there again. In the day of the typewriter, you didn't change stuff like that. But in the day of the word processor, there's no reason to say alacrity or assiduous, especially distinct words that have narrow meanings. You want to go look up alacrity. Maybe just eagerness would be good enough. Did we ever find out what gainsay meant? I didn't look it up.
Oh,
is it?
Yeah.
You see how confusing that word is? You see how confusing that word is? To deny. Why would to gain say something? How would that? It doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, so the whittling of sentences. Yeah, and I was saying, you just came a little bit late because I answered your question about my syntax, and I just write sentences over and over and over. I do read aloud. I don't read aloud to other people. I used to read aloud to other people, but I'm really not that sadistic of a person, so I stopped doing that. But yeah, reading aloud, especially if there's rhythm, there's no class of writers, of really good writers, who don't have some kind of rhythmic element in their work. But I want it has to sound good. If it sounds good, usually it'll read well. So I do that too, and I work. I revise endlessly. I probably wrote this book. It probably had 170 different incarnations, and I would venture to say that I wrote it, 10,000 times. Probably. Not from beginning to end, because it kept changing. It kept swapping stuff out and eliminating things. And of course, this was also an investigation, so I kept getting new information. Then I'd find out that I said something wrong about somebody else, and I'd have to correct that. And so a lot of the revising was just, facts and stuff like that. But yeah, I worked really hard on the syntax, the whole way it fits together, the continuity and the pacing. All those things. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks.
I have one.
Yeah.
Has an essay or story ever, you've read that one time, maybe you've had 5, where the piece just comes out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had about 3 of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. The anger pieces usually.
Yeah.
Anger pieces.
Yeah.
If the emotion is strong enough and you know where you're going, it sometimes that's enough to carry you through. And those could be the best pieces. Yeah. Anybody else?
said it took 6 years to write your memoir?
Yeah.
Is that right? And 170 different incantations.
Yeah.
How long before the first one was there?
The first one, I was going to write a straight journalistic account of what happened to my neighbor. And for a year, it was a journalistic exercise or a journalistic approach. But, I could see that that wasn't going to be enough. And I had wanted for a long time to just describe my town. And I had written some little short pieces about my town, but so many interesting people. And then I had already published a couple of essays about my marriage, and I published an essay about my son and his struggles with ASD, and I saw how these things might come together, although they weren't, immediately compatible. And so it took a long time to get all of those things, to build the transitions, to get all those things to fit together. And for the first 2 years, I operated from the premise that his death was a suicide, because the sheriff was very helpful, and he's a very intelligent guy, and he was adamant that it was a suicide. Or if it wasn't, then it had to be some kind of accidental death. And then I got the crime scene photographs, and I got to read some of the police reports and the autopsy, and I started looking at that crime scene, and I said, no, this... And there was, there was just so many things. And it's all a big circumstantial bag. My position now that it's a murder is based upon, this much circumstantial evidence. And I think the evidence that suggests this is a suicide, circumstantial evidence, is about that big. That's an opinion, because the thing is still open and unsolved. Anybody else? Thanks for asking all these questions, Clint, by the way. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I also really enjoyed the short chapters in this memoir.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is because of the economy of language, right? It has this really fast momentum. Yeah. And I was wondering if you initially made the decision to have these really short sections, or it came out of revision.
It had always been broken up into small sections, but by titling them, I made them chapters, and I like short books with short chapters that are titled. I don't know why, but it just draws me in more, and I know that this is kind of a, it's a method for making people read your book faster than they normally would. Maybe not. I don't know, because the mystery in the middle of that thing is kind of captivating. Somebody else had a question back there. Yeah.
I was wondering, before you actually decided to work on a main project, your first project, did you used to write short stories, really long stories?
Yeah, I started off with short stories. I thought that would prepare me to write the longer treatments, because novels are hard, but short stories are hard too. Yeah, but everybody's different. It just depends on what you've got, and what you're made of, and how much patience you've got. The problem with the story is all of these elements, and then with the novel, that's multiplied by however much longer the novel is than the story. So if you're talking about pacing and continuity, and keeping tonality, sustaining all that stuff in this giant project is really very difficult to do. Most people don't pull it off. I mean, Huckleberry Finn. My novel, Decline of the Lawrence Welk Empire, most people will agree that the ending just doesn't work. But most people who read Huckleberry Finn, certainly one of the great American novels, is rife with flaws itself. The prose is just wonderful. The characters are great. The landscape, all that stuff. But what's Tom Sawyer doing here? So novels are really. I've heard the novel defined as a long form with a major flaw, and there are very few exceptions to that. It's just hard to keep all that stuff spinning. All these. A short story might be one plate, but a novel is 10 plates, and you got to keep them all spinning. And then when your reader gets it, they have to be spinning plates. And it's hard to do.
How many times what's the most time you ever just kept repeating writing a sentence just to put it into a paragraph?
This sentence here, I'll see if I can find it. It took me, and I was just talking about it earlier, it took me It took me I think it took me 5 years to get right. And it's a fancy sentence. It's kind of it's sort of self-conscious. It's those people who say "kill your darlings." They would say, I probably can't find it because I don't remember where it is. Oh, look at that. Anyway, I wish I could recall it. I wish I had a better memory. God, those people who can recite from their work from memory. But there it is. Yeah, this one took me. This is a fancy sentence, though. But it took me 5 years to get right. I kept changing. I said, it's not right. And I'm not sure if it's right now. But anyway. And speaking of Mark Twain, the rumor mill, a chromium-dipped, triple-decked, steam-powered flibbertigibbet with wrought iron shafts, tied down escape valves, and overstoked boilers, continued to chug out the rumors. That took me 5 years to get the way I liked it. And I'm not exactly sure if I like it. But anyway. So, yeah. Just prepare. Because we can talk, we think we can write. Why the hell can't, I just told you this great story, about a Lithuanian parachute jumper, who fell into a pile of, fell into a haystack or whatever. And then all of a sudden I'll go home to write it down and it'll just start fading on. Why is it fading? The guy laughed when I said it. I got all the lines right. It had natural pacing. And then it just doesn't work all of a sudden. I guess it's because when you write, you're operating from a different part of your brain. That's got to be part of it. But anyway, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
You mentioned possibly not being happy with that sentence still. So at what point do you just go ahead and say, okay?
Yeah, at some point that's the whole thing with this book or any book or story. At some point you have to let it go. You don't get infinite gestation with. It's just got to go at some point. Actually, just before we went to press with this thing, my publisher said, "You know what? I like that version you did back in 2008." So I scrambled back to the version I did in 2008, and I said, "Yeah, that is a lot better. Why didn't you take it that time?" And so I swung the whole book back around to that one, because the debate from the beginning was whether you started off with the event, the professor tied to the tree, to draw your readers in, or anybody who might pick it up off the shelf and look at it. Or do you start off, you slow cook it, and you start off nice and slow, and go in so that your reader is almost like somebody, a resident of the town. And the whole thing can slowly unfold, and once you're in, if you can get the reader in, then you can be pulled along right through it, as the people in our town were. And we went back to that. And then Cheryl Strayed read it. She said, "You know what? You should put a prologue on here, a little teaser." And so we kind of did both. We ended up doing both. But, with the math professor's body being found as the teaser, as a kind of a teaser. If I had a regular readership like Pat Conroy, we were talking about Pat Conroy, I could probably have written this thing any way I wanted it, the way it should have been written. But since I don't have since my books don't sell that well, and I don't have people lined up for my next book, then I have to sort of, take steps to expand my readership. I sound like a sellout, don't I? Yeah, go ahead. You can tell me. Yeah.
Maybe, I hope this isn't too redundant, but how far do you get before you let yourself revise? I mean, do you beat the first sentence to death?
Oh, I don't ever revise until I've got something down. That's if I'm writing something, if I've got an idea about something and I throw down the clay, as I like to call it, then I'm going to just set it aside, and usually I'll come back the next day and just throw it away. There's no point in revising that. If it has merit, and I can see it connecting down the way, then I might make some revisions just to get a feel for it. But basically, I'd like the whole thing to be out before I start, turning the screws and polishing the mirrors and all that stuff. Yeah. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You spoke earlier about having several projects going at once.
Yeah.
And so, which makes total sense. But as you're doing this, moving among these pieces for projects, do you find that they talk to each other? Do you does an idea from one jump over to the other?
Yeah. They don't talk to each other too much unless I'm going to try to take a piece that's not working and take the part that's working out of it and then move it and then see if I can build something around that. I'll oftentimes take details or dialogue out of a piece that isn't working and put it someplace else. But that's more for fiction. Yeah, Clint.
Yeah, one more for me. Who do you rely on for feedback? Is it just editors?
Yeah, pretty much down to that. Al Nyquist, who writes for The Sun, will read my stuff. Every time I send him a piece, I know it's no good, and he says that it's no good, so I don't send it to him anymore. Or in other words, if I know, if I want to send this thing to Al and find out if it's any good, I know it's no good. So that's a pretty good litmus test. And then my friend Dave Janetta, who's doing the documentary on this, is a pretty good reader, and I've been sending him some stuff. And he'll give me his feedback. But mostly I'm relying on editors now, which is good.
Early on, did you have like friends, cohorts?
Oh yeah, sure. But it didn't really matter early on. It wasn't. None of it was any good. And then I just got to the point where you have to get to the point where you can get some objectivity and some instinct, and then that combination has got to get you through. And then you start sending stuff out and hoping that it lands. Yeah. Anybody else?
We've got time for a couple more good questions. So, Ryan?
Yeah, Ryan.
I wonder if it's possible for you to sort of put your finger on maybe just one thing that has helped you the most or improved your writing the most over the years.
Dedication. Dedication, persistence, belief in myself. When I was a kid, I didn't do anything well, and I got used to just being disregarded, and I was an excellent spectator. I didn't realize that was the perfect ground from which to become a writer. And then one day I was a long-haired, dope-smoking, just a loser. I was totally disenchanted. And then I was going to quit my Mark Twain class, speaking of Mark Twain for the third time, and the professor saw something and said, "Well, why don't you finish this Mark Twain novel?" And, he hadn't finished this, and so I just finished it. It seemed easy to me. I mean, I got his voice and his manner, and all of a sudden, people were looking at me and they were going, "Hey, that was a pretty good." It wasn't any good. None of that was any good. But she wanted me to go on television. She had some friends at the local CBS affiliate, and I was going to be the ghost of Mark Twain. Well, that was it for me. So I realized that I fit somewhere, that I could do something that would make people realize that I existed. And from that point on, that was the seed probably that gave me, and that was a bad thing too, because then I thought that I just dusted my knuckles off of my chest and said, well, this is just going to be a breeze. And then, and then I got my ass kicked for about the next 15 years because imitating Mark Twain is not exactly writing original work. And so, but it gave me the impetus. It gave me the confidence. I think. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that was probably the most important event. And again, so it's all about persistence, because you can make up for all your other shortcomings, whether or not, because we all do certain things well and don't do as writers. But persistence will cover a lot of those other foibles. And I didn't do very many things well, but I gradually learned how to write dialogue or to get an ear for dialogue. Your memory improves too. Capote claimed to have a photographic memory, so he'd interview Marilyn Monroe on the beach, and then he'd go home and just transcribe the whole thing. I don't know if that's true or not, but when you're keen to the world and everything is a story and everything that somebody says is dialogue, and of course I used to keep notebooks. I don't keep notebooks anymore. I've got too much stuff already to work on. But if you're attuned to it, if you've made yourself attuned to the world, then your perceptions are going to work better, especially your ear and your eye. And your brain, too, I think. Crystalline intelligence, they call it.
One last question.
Yeah.
writing?
We'll never. It looks like. Oh, yeah, April.
What was the point you started taking yourself seriously as a writer?
It hasn't happened yet. Really hasn't happened yet. I have no idea why you people came to listen to me talk. I really don't. But I'm flattered and I'm encouraged. Yeah. And I think that maybe the point at which you take yourself seriously as a writer, maybe that's a drop-off point. Because, you can shut you got to be open to the world, and that's what's hard about being any kind of artist. You got to be open perception of the world, and you can't shut it off and on. That's why so many writers and artists are drunks and drug abusers and they commit suicide, because you open up all this stuff and then it's coming in on you and you can't shut it off. You can't. It's not allowed. To be open that perceptually is to put yourself at mercy and you're highly vulnerable, and it can often be painful. And so a lot of writers, when they're done writing, they just want to shut that thing down. Brodigan called it steel spider webs. He thought he felt after he was done writing that the only way to get rid of those steel spider webs in his head was to get drunk. And of course, he ended his life before he was 50 in Bolinas and just drank himself silly. And he was a strange duck anyway. But I understand. I can understand perfectly what he went through. So anyway, did I answer the question? Did I answer it? Okay.
Josh, you have one more question.
Yeah.
In your essay, Free Rent at the Totalitarian Hotel, you mentioned this book you're writing about evil clowns.
Yeah.
Did you ever go back and revisit that idea?
No. That's the kind of crap I was writing, and it was really, kind of sad.
Okay, well, we've had a very good hour. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thanks for coming.